Now we're recording.
Okay.
Rabbi
We're on
Pasternak.
page Nun Tes
Chassidus class.
in the end of the Maimer Shmini Atzeres, Eter. Okay, so there's a few new guys, which is a bit of a problem.
No problem that they're here.
You can take my advice
We're
and
just
start over.
we're deep in the midst of Eter, but you probably read it before. So, in short, what we're saying as a little review from yesterday, which itself was a review from the last 3 days, was a review of what we did before. We'll try and catch you up in a few lines here. We're saying that essentially there are two levels of refinement. Two levels of birur, very good, right? And they're called hiskafi and hishapcha. You take an entity and you want to bring it out of its yeshus and more towards the Eibishter. The first step is you have to subjugate its passions for worldliness, and that's called subjugation or hiskafia. But that, even if you'll subjugate it, you don't really unroot it from its foreign desires. You just quell them, right? You just basically stamp them out. But if you would let go of the force against it, they would return to their negative patterns and behaviors. So that's stage one. It's a necessary beginning. But then you get to something called hishapcha, transformation. And if you do stage one, which we also called circumcising your own heart, right? Circumcising the heart. Why is it called circumcision? Because stage one has to do with removing the foreskin, taking away parts that don't belong on your body. Which in avoda, which in divine service, is taking out of your life things that just have no place, right? There's certain things that are just not Jewish, and you have to put them out, and it's basically accomplished through brute force. You just have to have a strong will and put them away. Once you do that, that's only stage one. Then you're rewarded with which is what's called hishapcha, transformation. Transformation is already a gift from above. It says Hashem will circumcise your heart, not you will circumcise your own heart, but Hashem will circumcise your heart. And this is the inyan, that it's a reward from your work. And what happens is you get transformed. In other words, you no longer even have a foreign desire that you have to rule over. You only have one will anymore, and it's the will for Hashem. Now, both of these levels, in fact, are on what we're dealing with is on the lower level. Because at the end of the day, when you're still dealing with an entity which is other than Hashem, which is essentially you, that has to either curb its passions for God or even be transformed into godliness, the second level, you're still dealing with a certain level of falseness, but there is something else besides God to begin with. It's an entity that needs to be transformed. You with me there? Mm-hmm. So therefore, any light which is sort of designated to be granted to you to perform this process, whether it's the first level or the second level, all that is a lower level light. It's a light which is called, in fact, we call that light darkness. Even though it's light, it's a light which compared to real light is called darkness. Why? Once again, because it is entering into the feeling of self in order to transform that self, in order to turn over, so it recognizes self, and it's in some way sort of coded with this sense of self as well. Yeah? Now these two things are called the first birur and the second birur. The birur rishon, the first refinement process, and the second refinement process. And in sort of Kabbalistic terms, you switch places on me. In Kabbalistic terms, we call this the refinement that happens with the shem ban, and the refinement that happens with the shem ma. So to get into all that might be a little complicated at this particular moment, but in general, it's just as we said, just Kabbalistic terminology. We'll have to get to it as we move on. But the lower dimension of godliness called ban, this is the aspect of divinity which literally climbs into the physical container of your personhood and has to come face to face with the animal which you carry around with you. And he has to fight him on his own turf and so forth. And that's why this is like the main struggle that most of us will deal with in our lives, right? And if you're able to accomplish this mission of fighting with your animal and holding him back, you've achieved the birur, the refinement of the shem ban. Then you move up to the refinement of the shem ma, where you are sort of rewarded with this level of bittul, with this level of self-refinement, which will actually transform you into a godly being. Now, this level of Shem Ma, okay, it's called the lower Yaakov. We spoke about this idea that there's two levels of ayin, two levels of nothing. You know, I'm realizing right now that there's a bunch of different levels here, and we're like in the middle of a very complicated point. I don't know how to handle this, so let's just say l'chaim and move on.
It's all good.
Okay, so we'll try this again. A little review, it won't hurt us. Okay, there's something called yesh ma'ayin, right? There's the ayin represents the godly nothingness, and the yesh represents this feeling of worldliness and self. And in general, we say Hashem created the world. Yesh ma'ayin, the world is something from nothing. But this idea of nothing, we call God nothing. It's sort of this notion that there ain't od milvado. There's nothing but Him. And in this realization that there's nothing but Him, in this godly dimensions that there's nothing but Him, the truth of the matter, there's two levels of it. One more refined than the other. It's called two levels of ayin. And in a sense, we call it two levels of Yaakov. The higher Yaakov and the lower Yaakov. Because in the Chumash it says, Hashem says Yaakov, Yaakov 2 times. And so why does he repeat himself? Because Yaakov represents this idea of godly light, and there's two realms of godly light. The first realm of, okay, so put that in its place for a second. A moment ago, we said there's something called light, which is really called darkness. Right? Remember that part? Alright, so the light which is really called darkness, in other words, a light which is shining to the darkness in order to refine it, which itself is called darkness, that's the lower Yaakov. So what's the higher Yaakov? The higher Yaakov is a light which doesn't know from any darkness whatsoever. In other words, we said that Yaakov was called a man without hair in the Torah. He was born Ish Chalak. And what's the idea of hair? Hair is like a lead-in, a contraction of energy from the brain to the hair, representing a lead-in to the existence of something else. In other words, contracting the main light in order to send a little siphoning of light down to a lower dimension in order to enliven it. This is the idea of hair. So the fact that it says Yaakov had no hair means he was in a dimension which was completely removed from anything having to do with the other. Purely God alone. And this is the true ayin. Right? So that's what's called light in its essence. So real light is the higher Yaakov. Light which is called darkness is the lower Yaakov. Now what's the difference? The lower Yaakov essentially is like a shliach. He's an emissary of the higher Yaakov. And the difference is that the higher Yaakov, he doesn't know from the world at all. In other words, the level of divinity which literally precedes any thought of any other. It's God all by himself in the very beginning of all things. So there's obviously a perfect oneness there. There's no notion of division. But when Hashem then creates the world, he then sends his emissary, the little miniature version of Yaakov HaKatan, right? Who is now bears the same notion of oneness, but he's now sent inside of a realm of division and plurality, and he's intended to bring that oneness into a divided world and recreate and unify Hashem even in a place of darkness. And that's called, that light itself of Yaakov is called darkness because he's sent into the darkness in order to transform it and refine it. And he does it basically well, it's done in two ways, as we just said. Hiskafia, subjugating yourself, but that's not really Yaakov. That's like the job that you have to do on your own. And then when you subjugate yourself, you can be rewarded with this transformation, which is called the lower Yaakov, which means that as you are still yet an entity, you can be transformed into pure godliness. That's still called the lower Yaakov, because it's already oneness as it has to translate itself into a world of plurality. Okay, I'll stop for a second if anyone has any questions.
It seems a little contradictory from what we've learned before, that we learned that the greatest lies in the darkness.
It's not so contradictory because ultimately, as we said, the most difficult process in all this is neither Yaakov's. Right? It's before you get to the lower Yaakov, you have to subjugate yourself. I mean, that is the most difficult job because you're plunged into a foreign body with foreign wills and animalistic wills. And Yaakov is just the reward for your service of having to overcome all of that. That work of overcoming it, hiskafia, that's the most difficult of all these tasks. It maybe is the lowest, the least rewarded, as it were. Like, it's because you're just fighting like an endless battle with yourself. But in fact, in that place, there's a tremendous amount of divine divinity. Okay, anyone have any questions on anything we just said right there? Don't be afraid, or maybe you should be afraid. All right, we'll try it. Let's move on inside.
Wait, the whole time I wasn't wearing a kippah? No one told me?
I
Couldn't say it.
I can't feel that I have a kippah on my head.
Okay. So we're going to take it from page Nun Tes. I think that's pretty much a thorough review, though. So if you don't understand, now would be a good time to ask any questions. You got it? All right, so moving right along.
Where are we?
Page Nun Tes. We're going to start with... the line starts Chashucha l'nehora. It's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines up from the bottom of the first paragraph at a period. See that?
Yeah.
Okay, it says Zeu gam kein abirosh hanaise al de Torah. What we're talking about, the lower Yaakov right now, the transforming of darkness into light. This is which we call the birur sheni, the second refinement process.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
What I remember that in the Ein Sof, the Temimei is the Ein Sof is darkness, isn't it true?
Yeah.
Temimei is, so it would seem to me that that's where the essence of the greatest light is.
Okay, but we're talking about light.
That's what I mean.
So darkness is also good. Time to talk about darkness, we're talking about darkness. But here we're talking about 2 levels of light. Right? Just one level is called darkness, but in a it's a positive connotation or a negative connotation, but it's just called darkness for the present time. So the idea is that you have the second refinement process, and he's saying that the second birur, the birur of Ma, it's called the birur hanaise al de Torah. It's also what happens through the refinement of Torah. Birur rishon hu idea tefillah. So we're going to say this whole thing over again, but just in slightly different terminology regarding our divine service. There's prayer and there's Torah learning. These are basically, the 2 tracks. So he's saying that prayer is on the dimension of the first refinement process, and Torah learning is the second refinement process. Just again, let me put everything in framing. First and second refinement process, they're all on the realm of light called darkness, right? There's another level which is called light, which is not a refining process. It's beyond all refining processes. So right now we're talking about the lower realm in general. So of the lower realm, there's 2 parts. It's called subjugation and transformation. It's also called prayer and Torah.
Which one is prayer? Which one is Torah?
Prayer is the lower one. It's the
Which is subjugation.
subjugation, yeah. And he says the Shas Tlosa Shas Krav. It says that the time of prayer is called a time of war. Shubachinis birur deban milamata lamayla. And what does it mean? This time of war. Let's remember what this first refinement process is all about. It's the idea that the soul climbs directly inside of another being, which is called the body, and he becomes the body. He doesn't just climb in there and he's like sort of operating the body as a second as a driver. He becomes intermingled with the flesh to the point that the light or the soul becomes a goof, becomes a body. And that is an unbelievable descent. This is like the great descent that we talk about. The soul comes down from a tall tower to a low pit, right? And this is the idea that it becomes a physical entity suddenly. So that's called investing inside of the territory of the enemy. And therefore it's called war. When you go inside of the enemy's territory, you're in like a very deep state of war. And it's called also from below to above. What's the idea from below to above? Because the work is not given, the rewards of the work are not given to you. You have to fight for every inch of land. And this is very simple. A person has desires that are not necessarily are always in accordance with the Torah, right? And you have to fight for every inch of land. Your Yetzer Hara is just as strong, seemingly, and he's pushing you in a different direction. And your mamash holding your ground like mamash 2 wrestlers. You have to push with every ounce of your strength in the other direction, the direction of God. This is never easy, and this is symbolized. Is that a word? Emblemized.
Now,
It's in the concept of prayer. This is what prayer is, because every second you're standing there in prayer, Like someone said to me yesterday, like I couldn't focus. It wasn't. That's prayer. When you know that you're like in the right place. The Alter Rebbe says there's those who think that because they have these foreign thoughts in prayer that they didn't have a good davening. The Rebbe said that would be true if they had one soul, but since they have two souls, he says it's like wrestlers. When you're wrestling with someone, when you see that when one person sort of like gets his adrenaline, starts to push hard, the other one gets in and starts to push hard. So the animal soul sees that you're coming to pray, he gets nervous, and so he gives you an extra measure of foreign thoughts and foolish things to think about. That's not a sign that you're not having a good davening, that's a sign that you are having a good davening, because you're in the fight. So this is called the first beer of the Shem Ban, which I'm not going to get into that right now. Kenoda, as it's known. There you go. To those who know, you know. Bir the Torah, whereas now you have the second refinement process. Learning Torah is not like that at all. Learning Torah is simply a gift from God. You're working with information which is not human information. And not only that, but the Torah is a divine object whose function, we said Torah is called Chokhmah, right? In general, Chokhmah means wisdom, but Chokhmah is like this deep concept called Koach Ma. To go back to this that we mentioned yesterday. What is Koach Ma? Is the same letters of Chokhmah, but just rearranged. And you can do that in Hebrew sometimes, right? And what does it mean, the rearrangement of the words Koach Ma? Koach means a power that you have, which already indicates some kind of notion of separateness and plurality. Because there's the idea of there's the 10 powers. And once you have the idea of the 10 powers, it's like the same 10 powers that the world is made out of. There's worldliness, there's otherness, and Chokhmah is the first one of the powers that are called other. However, what's this power? It's called the power of what? Koach Ma. Which means that at the same time that you have this power, the particular power that this is not a power of understanding, it's not a power of loving, it's not a power of sight or hearing, which is like sort of described in a particular finite way. It's the power of bittul. It's the power of not being there. The power of emptying yourself out completely and letting God into that space. So it's a little bit of a contradiction in terms. On one hand, and this is like the definition of the lower Yaakov. On one hand, it's in the world, it's a thing, it's not the higher Yaakov which doesn't even know from the world. But on the other hand, its place in the world is to bring absolute singularity and unity in the world, and to transform every worldly thing into godly thing. So this is like Torah. It says b'chokhmah isboriru. You can refine things with chokhmah, because when you bring chokhmah to a thing, you access that thing and you put it in its place. You make it realize that it's part of the whole divine system of godliness, and you negate its individuality. And so this is what Torah is. Torah is that entity which enables us to superimpose Torah on every particular thing, including ourselves. And when you do that, when you live a life of Torah, when this is an object of Torah, these are words of Torah, it's a government of Torah, etc., 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 it's not a government anymore. And it's not a cup, and it's not a you. It's the Eibishter. Because it takes a thing and it turns it into a no thing. So this is a process from above to below. This is not your work doing that. It's because you're holding the Torah. So that's the process of total transformation, which is actually a process which comes from above to below. As a reward for your work of allowing yourself to sort of position yourself to accept the Torah, that's prayer. Once you do the hard work of saying, okay, I'm going to accept the Torah, I'm going to allow this negation to come over me, then you apply the Torah to yourself. That's not your information, it's not your mind, it's God's mind. And when you let it into you, you negate yourself. Yeah,
So wouldn't that be the higher Yaakov?
No, that's the lower Yaakov.
But it's the higher of the lower, right?
So when Yaakov...
That's right. It's the higher. It's transformation as opposed to subjugation, right? So it's higher in terms of the fact that you have hiskafia and hispapcha.
Yeah.
This is hispapcha,
Subjugation.
so it's higher. But hispapcha and hiskafia are both on the lower dimension. They're called darkness as opposed to light.
So
When Yaakov said Baruch Shem Kavod, was that on the first? That was going down to the second.
I don't know.
So when you transform yourself, you're summoning the innermost dimension of the crown. That's what you're saying. That was one of the things I remember for last year.
Okay. Yeah, I think I was saying that then.
Yeah.
That's true. Okay.
It's just a very big line. That's why I just took it.
Okay, go with it. So Torah is from above to below. It's the second refinement, the refinement of the Shem Ma. Okay, here we're going back inside. The refinement process happens automatically. Not like the war that you're in, where you don't have automatically, I'm going to gain 1 inch from my enemy. It doesn't work automatically. But Torah is pushed automatically. You take in Torah to yourself, and it's divine. So it does something to you that is automatic. It transforms you. It makes you not be there. If your words are Torah, just like Moshe Rabbeinu, think about Moses. He's speaking, right? But what's he saying? He's saying the Torah. So through a human being, God is talking. If God is talking, Moses is not there really. It's God is there. He's just like sort of like this faint apparition which enables God to be in that place. Which is exactly what I was saying before. Chochmah is this idea that it's a thing which is really no thing. It's in the world, but its function in the world is to not be. So this is called a bit of Metzias, a total negation of self. And it happens, as we're saying, automatically. Once you access the Torah, this is what happens to you. Vezeu emes havaya leolam. And that's what it means. There's a pasuk that says, Ve'emes Hashem leolam, which simply, in a simple reading, you would say that God, the truth of God is forever. But you can also read it like this. Emes Hashem leolam means the truth of God goes to the world as well. The truth of God is seemingly beyond the world. That the world is some kind of a contradiction to the truth of God, because the world represents some kind of other, and the reality is all there is God. So the truth of God seems like it's beyond the world. But here's a pasuk that says the truth of God to the world. That we're going to bring the truth of God and put it in the place of the world as well. We're going to negate the world. Ein, and what is emes? Ein emes el Torah. So emes Hashem le'olam, the truth of Hashem to the world. What is emes? Truth. Sha'alidei zeh nimshach b'chines emes havaya. B'chines bitul b'metzias. So through this process of emes, which is Torah, you can draw down the truth of Havaya. Havaya is the name of God, which is that all there is Him. And you can bring that to the world. Bechinas bitul metzias comes into the world. Emes, Havaya, le'olam. So when you have Emes, when you have Torah, you have Havaya, which is beyond limitations, le'olam, into the world. Ugam kem gilu bechinas das elyon. What is it really? Another way of perceiving it is the revelation of what we call das elyon. I know we're going kind of fast. But let's slow down for a second. What is Das Elyon? We spoke about it now 3 times. I'm not going to put anyone on the spot, but can I have a volunteer for a simple, concise definition of Das Elyon?
Knowledge of God.
The higher one.
The higher what?
Knowledge.
What is Das?
Knowledge.
Here we say sometimes opinion. We say Keil Deus Havaya. Keil Deus Havaya is a pasuk which means Keil is God. I'm not saying the name, but Keil. Deus is like basically, he has das, he has knowledge. So God is a God of knowledge, but it says Deus in the plural.
It's higher and lower.
So why is it Deus, which can mean Hashem is a God of 2 opinions, basically what it really means. The word das also means opinion, right? If a person's going to give you their opinion on something, you say, my daito, right? What's his das on this matter? So it's like God has 2 opinions. And this is called the higher opinion and the lower opinion. What's the higher opinion?
That there isn't a world.
Good. That there is no world. Whereas Hashem is, so to speak, standing, the reality is that all there is Him, and there is no existence of the world. The world is ayin, it's nothing. And what's the lower opinion? That's not the perception of the created beings. We might philosophize and ponder the truth that all there is God, but our immediate reality is that there's all kinds of other things, and that there is a world, and we can't really shake that from ourselves, and it's not our fault. Hashem removed the higher opinion from the created world, and He gave us the lower opinion, which is that we perceive a world, and if there's a God, He's like some apparition that we cannot understand and we can only meditate upon. So what He's saying here is that with Torah, which is kind of an amazing concept, and you reach this level of bitul metzias, the gift, the reward for your warring of your work in davening, and then you go from the Beit Knesset to the Beis Medrash. You're supposed to go learn Torah after you daven. This brings down, we said, automatically a gift from above of negating you altogether, like a Moshe Rabbeinu, and this is called revelation of Das Elyon. It brings into Das Tachtun, into the lower opinion, the reality of Das Elyon, of the higher opinion. That you could be in this dimension, on this side of the curtain, and you could be in perception of the truth, which is that all there is God. The Bir Harishon, hu b'chinas das tachton, And he goes and he says it now very simply. The first refinement level, which is davening, or the shem ban, or iskafia, they all go on the same line, the subjugation part. All of that is working in the realm of the lower opinion, das taktun. Why? Because you're fighting a war. If you're fighting a war, you for sure believe that there's two sides here. Like you're already the fact that you're even fighting the war means you're already like completely confused in thinking that the reality is that there's me and you. So, but still, that's the reality that God gave us. We can't fight it. So all we have to do is work in that dimension, be a good soldier, and create what's called bitul hayesh. Have hiskafia, have subjugation, control ourselves. I can't help it. I'm in this realm of duality, so I'm going to win the war of duality, and I'm going to uphold the Torah even though I have all these foreign desires.
So it's better to daven before you learn. Basically.
Right, and that's what we say. Chassidus is not really called learning. You're not like being yotzi the Indian of learning Torah, really. When you're learning Chassidus before you daven, this is going into the mitzvah of davening, of knowing before whom you stand. You're not allowed to go daven, roll out of bed and daven. Many people sadly do that. But really, you're supposed to prepare yourself for davening by realizing who you're standing before you daven. Because how are you going to really win this war in davening unless you first thought for a second that I'm like mamish dealing with God over here and myself and all my So you have to prepare yourself for davening. This is Chassidus before davening. Yeah.
Are you? Is it about davening or is it about like everything?
Everything. Davening, I said, is like I made up a word even for it. It's emblematic of a no. That word is in the dictionary.
Symptomatic?
It seems like the Yetzer Hara follows you to go buy a falafel.
Right, but here's the thing: if you don't daven, you're for sure going to lose the battle at the falafel stand. You know, your first encounter with the enemy is your davening. So you're right. It says, "Alavai she's pal kol hayom." Right? You love that line. Alavai, we should daven the whole day. It says because really we are davening the whole day. You should be in that fight the whole day long. However, what if you come and you're a soldier and it's like wartime and you're like I'm going to go get like an ice cream in the beginning of the war. You won't make it to the end of the war either. Right? You have to. You're right. Essentially, it's a whole day davening, and it begins with actual davening. But that's all what we call a bitul hayesh, just simply subjugating yourself. V'shem ma hu b'chinas das elyon. The reward of that is what we call the shem ma, the level of the true bitul, the higher opinion. V'yesh lomad hazeh inyan laman das kol amei haaretz. So we spoke about this idea that why did Hashem bring all the plagues to Egypt? In order so all the people of the world would know that I am God. And it says, Laman das kol amei haaretz. In order that there be das, the same word, like opinion, of everyone would know that I am God. But it also brings the das hu lashon shvira, that even though das, as we've been describing it correctly, as knowledge, it has this whole other meaning that's brought in the Torah sometimes, which means to destroy something, to break something. It just has two different meanings. So you read this line, you could read this line in a separate way. In order to know all the nations of the land, in order for all the nations of the land will know that I'm God, it can also be read like this. In order for all the nations of the land will be destroyed. What does the nations of the land represent? The goyishkeit inside of us, basically. The animalistic tendencies. And all that will be destroyed when you reach this level of the Das Elyon. When Das Elyon comes into the higher opinion comes in, then the nations of the land, which is everyone thinks that they have their own little corner of the world that they own, they're going to war with everybody else in order to preserve it and so forth. All that opinion, all that perception will be destroyed when you internalize the truth of Das Elyon. Through Das Elyon, you wind up breaking entirely the level called Amei Haaretz, the nations of the world. Not, God forbid, they actually get destroyed, but like their concept of feeling that you are separate gets destroyed. The Yos B'chinas Bitul Metzias L'Gamrik. Why? Because everyone's going to be like a little Moshe Rabbeinu. Everyone's going to realize that everything that's coming out of them is God. They're not going to have like a corner of the world they think is theirs and feel this level of separateness. Okay, going to the next paragraph. Amnam kol zehu b'chinas shema. So all this great achievement of the higher opinion that we just spoke about, the destroying of the world and everything in a positive way, all of that is the shema. This is what Tzemach was getting to. Even as high as it is, it's merely the lower level of Yaakov, which is sent as a shliach down into a world in order to refine a feeling of self. In other words, he's still in an arena where there's an other, even if he's going to transform it. As it says elsewhere, the bechinas das elyon v'amshacha shema hanal kol zehu bechinas atzilus. That all of this process that we described, which is the idea of das elyon, the higher opinion, and drawing down this shema to do the transformation process, all this is from the level of Atzilus, the highest of the four worlds of Atzilus. The bechinas oros v'kelim de Atzilus zeu ma shenimdad lefi erech hamshacha b'biyah. Okay, so let's get into this a little bit. So, what is a world? First of all, a world is is something which has 10 sfirot, 10 of these sort of divine emanations, and then some interplay that each of the spheros has what's called light and vessel, which is almost like the soul and the body. So too, it's like a human being. We also have like sort of 10 divine points, the mind and the emotions, etc. And also by us, we have the vessel that holds it. You have like your brain, and then you also have your intellect, which sits inside your brain. So this is a little miniature version of what's going on in all the higher dimensions. That each world has a different like type of body and a different type of light, which corresponds to that body. The more subtle and spiritual your body is, the more overwhelmingly powerful the light is, because the vessel does not constrain it as much. You following this? Mm-hmm. So if you go way up to the higher worlds, which we're going to say even above the four worlds, you're going to go into the Or Ein Sof, even there you have lights and vessels. Just what? Over there, the vessels are actually completely nullified. They lost themselves entirely. And since they lost themselves entirely, the light is completely unrestrained, and it's infinite light, because there's no vessel. The vessels have been like basically negated, and there's nothing holding back the light. So it's sort of just a theoretical world, therefore, because there's really no vessels to sort of hold everything. Take the opposite extreme, like our world and the worlds near ours, up the ladder. The vessels are very strong. The vessels have been given sort of the go-ahead from Hashem to be thick, coarse vessels, like a physical vessel even. And therefore the light, you can hardly even see that there's light. Would you say this cup is alive? Because the Kabbalists would say that it's alive. Because it has a soul inside. It wouldn't be here if it didn't have mamash, a soul and a life force. But the vessel is so coarse that you can hardly make out that there's a soul inside. Even a man who's like the premium, of the world, if you will, even us, you can see that the person's alive. You can see even that he's intelligence, but really he's like almost defined by his body, because the vessels here are very, very coarse. So the light is very diminished. Now, all this was to a lead-in to discuss like this one world called Atzilus, which is the first of the four worlds. There's this perfect blend, basically, of light and vessel. And why is it a perfect blend? Because it's not yet coarse enough to deny the absolute oneness of God. In other words, you don't look at the body and think that it's merely a body. The vessels are almost transparent, enabling you to realize that not only is it God-like, it is God. It's basically God's version of being an entity. Right? Not to get a little bit radical here, but all through the Torah we talk about Hashem's arms, Hashem's eyes, Hashem's breath, Hashem's speech. Right? We talk about Hashem as like a man all the time. Right? So is Hashem a man? No. But why does Hashem call himself a man? Because of this world of Atzilus, he basically encloses his infinite light into a body of spheros, but it's not such a coarse body that it looks like there's something else besides God. It's his body. It's God and his body. So this is called it's a spiritual body. We want to get off. This is one of the reasons why, by the way, Kabbalah was not taught to the masses, because the ideas like this can become heretical very quickly if you don't understand them properly. But we're in a generation where we're told to learn Kabbalah, so we probably do understand them properly. And the idea is that this is a level of... Now, why in the first place did Hashem create a container for himself? It really wasn't for himself. He contained himself so that at this level of Atzilus, he would now have what's called finite lights in order to display and to produce in the lower worlds a creation. Because God, as He is completely infinite, is not sort of in like set up, right? He didn't like set up shop yet in order to make a world. He's so infinite that anything will come out of Him would be infinite, and therefore there would be no existence. His will and His interest of having a world would not ever have hatched had He not sort of first made the first setup of making first Himself limited and finite, so that then from a finite version of God He could produce a finite and limited world. You understand this idea? So this is the world of Atzilus. So going to this, what are we saying here? That all of these refinement processes that we just described, the bittul, the shema, the lower Yaakov, all that, it's not the ultimate, right? Because all of it comes from Atzilus. And that's why I went into that whole conversation just now. Because we can see that Atzilus is not a place of pure oneness mamish. There's a body there of some sort. And therefore, any form of refinement or transformation that's going to come from that level is only able to take the world to that level, not higher. And since even at that world, there's not a complete negation, it's called a world, so therefore the worlds can only be nullified with the power of that world up into that world, which therefore it's not a complete nullity. It's a nullity at the level of God's body. And that's why it's merely the lower Yaakov. You follow?
We nullify our world by reaching, like having an interaction with the world above us. So at Silas, there's no higher world, so it can't be negated further.
Right, it can be negated further, but it can't be called a world anymore.
Not by a world.
Right? It's like the higher Yaakov then.
Yeah.
Okay, exactly. So going back inside.
So Rabbi,
Yeah.
Atzilus and all these worlds are lower Yaakov?
No, Atzilus, you could maybe say, is the lower Yaakov. But even, I wouldn't even say that. I would say that the Shema, which is basically the third quadrant of the world of Atzilus, right? Of Atzilus has four quadrants, Yud Kei Vav Kei, or Chochma Bina, the emotions, and Malchus, right? So the Shema fits in the emotion, right?
Which is the third?
It's the third.
God has four faces.
It's the third, right? Now, the Shema is a Shliach. So he doesn't stay there. He's sent into the lower worlds in order to make even the lower, like the coarse vessels, be tinged with the Shema, so they can be transformed and then resemble Atzilus. That's what they. So Atzilus bears the Shema and sends out the Shema.
Starting from the Shema, the rest is all lower Yaakov.
Is there a keter of Atzilus?
Hold on. Yeah, there is. No, Yaakov is the Shema. Yaakov, the word Yaakov, let me maybe give you a different explanation. Yaakov is broken into two words, right? Yud, Akev. The word Yaakov is two words. Yud, Akev. Yud represents the higher divinity. Akev is the heel. Yaakov is this idea that he can bring the higher divinity all the way down into the heel. That's what the Shema does. It's like the Torah. It's a messenger. It comes from very, very, very high, and it comes all the way down to this little world in order to turn this world into godliness. It's literally what the Torah is. Yaakov is Torah. Right? Yaakov represents Torah. Yaakov is emes. So the Shema is in Atzilus, but it also travels outside of Atzilus to bring the light of Atzilus to the lower places. And even when my point that we're getting to here, or the Rebbe's point that we're getting to here, is even when it does that, it's merely bringing the world to a bittul of Shema, not higher. So all that is the lower Yaakov. The bechinas oros v'kelim d'Atzilus. What are the lights and vessels of Atzilus? Zeu ma shenimdad lefi erech hamshachas biyah. It's what Hashem measures Himself in order to be in approximately close, so that He can bring something down and create the lower worlds, as we said a moment ago. What are the light? Why does Hashem measure the lights and vessels of Atzilus? So that He would get into like a set up, prepared zone, so that from there He could bring forth real measured lights and finite entities of the world of the lower three worlds. Ve'ein ze or chadash, the bechinas atzmius ein sof. And this is not what we're calling the or chadash, right, of the essential light of the ein sof. Meaning what? Okay, I think he means like this. We spoke about a mimer. I'm going to just go ahead. We could probably just skip this line, but if he's going to say it, I might as well say it too. He's saying I believe he's saying like this. We spoke about a mimer just previously about Sukkos, where he talked about this idea of Kol Ezrach Yoshe B'Sukkos. Every native of the land will sit in booths. Right? And it mentioned the idea of sitting in booths twice. One by everybody and one by every native. And we said the idea of sitting in booths was this notion of taking an infinite light and settling it into a vessel. That's the idea of Sukkot in general, taking an infinite light and sitting it. Right? Like, in other words, it's an impossibility, it's a contradiction in terms, taking something infinite and putting it inside of something finite, but that's what Sukkot gives us the power to do. That light that we draw down is called it's called an Or Chadash. Right? It's a new light. Why a new light? Because the light which is siphoned off for the worlds, right? Like we talk about every Rosh Hashanah, Hashem sort of brings forth a little piece of light, and that light has all of the information, all of the ongoings of the entire world for 1 year. And when the year is over, he retracts that light and brings a new one, right? Now, this is a metaphor to understand. There's sometimes you're living in a moment like now, we're not Rosh Hashanah, where you're dealing with a moment which you're not dealing with new light. The light that is enlivening every action that we're going to have for the rest of the year already came out. It's new to us because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But we've already drawn it down into the reality. It's not called a new light. You understand what I'm saying? Some lights are new lights. In other words, when it first came in, it was like bringing from a place of absolute newness. God himself had not yet hatched this light. He brought light out of himself, and it was a new light. Right? That's called the Or Ein Sof. The Or Ein Sof is sort of shining out of Hashem, essentially new all the time. It's not something that he's already planned of and so forth. There's also something called the Ezrach, the native. What's the native? The native is even beyond the new light. Because new light is still a level which is coming out. It's ejected. Once it's ejected, it's already not 100% one with Hashem. So there's something beyond it. There's the source of the new light. And that's called the native. Right? Native is a guy who's always lived there. So this is a level of mamish being one with Hashem in a way that you're not even renewed. So far, so good. Now what we're saying now is to negate both of these. That the Shem Ma of Atzilus is not even a new light. In other words, it's the lower Yaakov. It's not in the realm where it's like just fresh now coming out of Atzilus. It's already part of the siphoned off levels of godliness that have been set aside for the worlds already. Another way of putting it is Hashem made the four worlds and they're sort of already in place. If Hashem wants to, he can bring forth new hamshachas, new revelations into those worlds, and that would be a new light. But that's not what the Shem Ma is. The Shem Ma is just Atzilus already as it is, not with an influx of extra light. But that's enough for us to refine ourselves up to the level of Atzilus. We don't need at that level to be supercharged yet above that. That's already called the new light of the essence. Is that clear, all that?
Yeah. Would that be Shem Av and Shem Sag?
Going higher, exactly. Okay, Kamo Kein, Hugam Bamshachas Hamakif B'chinas Chitzonius HaKeser. Shekol Zeh Hu HaShayach L'Ishtalshlus V'Shayach L'Birurim. So we've been talking about the Shem Ma as though, and calling it the lower Yaakov because it's relevant to the worlds. Even though it transforms the worlds, it's still relevant to the worlds. He now just brings the conversation up a notch. Same pattern, but just up a notch. He says the same is true when it comes to what we call the makif of the external part of Keser. You just asked, is there a Keser of Atzilus? Yes. In Keser of Atzilus, there's two parts. External Keser and internal Keser. Keser means the crown. It sits on top of that man of the highest world. Like a crown that sits on top of the head. And the idea is that there's also sort of like a perspective of the lower part of Keser. It works the same way of the Shem Ma. It's Keser B'chlal is above the world, right? That's the idea. It's the crown above the head. But the lower part of Keser actually touches the head, which means the world is in its sights. Just like the Shem Ma, right? It's a bittul, but it's a koach at the same time. So it has both qualities. This is like the lower part of Keser. Which means it's still relevant to the orderly descent of the world. It's still relevant to the hishtalshalus. And therefore it's relevant to refining something.
It'd be Arich, right?
Yes, Arich, that's what it is. But the true ayin, now we just jumped up to the higher Yaakov. The real ayin, the true nothingness, this is the inner part of the crown, which has no relevance whatsoever to refining a separate world, because it exists in a realm before there's any world. That's what we say, Yaakov is truly the firstborn. He comes before Esav, who represents worldliness. Yaakov truly was the firstborn. He precedes worldliness. In his true source. And therefore he's the one who's fit to take the bracha as well. What's the bracha? The bracha is the idea of bringing absolute negation and nullity to all things. So since Yaakov really is the firstborn who precedes the world, he can also draw forth levels from that place and bring the essence of Hashem into the world. That's what it means the bracha. The true essential light. The true essential light is not a light which crawls into the confines in any way of the created beings in order to fix them. It's the true light of God which precedes all creation. Yaakov can draw that down. That's the blessing of Yaakov. Ultimately, we'll bring that to the world. And this is what we're finishing a mimer of Shmini Atzeres here. Whereas what is Shmini Atzeres? It's the final holiday after Sukkot. We have 7 days of Sukkot where you offer 70 sacrifices for the 70 nations. And then the final day, Hashem says, you know what? Let's just offer one sacrifice because I want to just spend a little time with you before the party's over. Let's send everybody else home and I want to spend time with you.
The native.
Yeah, and it says, "You lecha levadra." I want to be with you alone and no foreigners with you. Well, think about that. That line is exactly what the whole thing we just described. Ultimately, you alone and no foreigners with you is this level of atik, panimius atik, where there is not even a hair yet to give an extension into the world. It's you, and that's the true level of Yaakov. So what happens on Shmini Atzeres? Like the finale of Rosh Hashanah and so forth, is that you get to this place where you actually are embodying this level that it's you alone and there's no others with you. Not just that we're hanging out with the king by ourselves, but there is no other reality except for Hashem, and it's the Yidden who are the kli for that, because our higher Yaakov comes out. This level is called you alone. And it's only relevant to Neshamas Yisrael. Esav and all the other nations do not have a way of being a vessel to hold that, because they're in their very inception, they come from a different place where worldliness is the cloth from which they're hewn, right? The stones, whatever, missing metaphors there, but they come from a dimension where there is already worldliness to begin with in their source. So they for sure can't bring a level of infinity beyond the source of worlds through their work. Only the Am Yisrael, because we come from this level of Yaakov, which is the firstborn, we can be a kli for complete nullification before Hashem. Which is why also the mitzvah of uniting God and making God one, as we've talked about many times, is only addressed to the Jews. The non-Jews also have mitzvahs from God. They have to believe in God, they have to have no other gods, etc. But to say that God is one, to miyached Hashem, it says Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That commandment is given only to the Jewish people, because this realization that there is nothing else besides Him, it's not within the realm of the regular human mind. The human mind perceives other. It's only in the realm of the Jewish soul that it actually perceives a place where there is nothing but Him. Mitzad Shor Shama Amiti, from our true source. The Eino Shayach L'Birurim. It's not even relevant to refine something because there is no other thing. But the light which comes down in order to refine, even though it ultimately also comes down from above, like we said, the Shema, like the Torah, it's also a heavenly gift. But it's a light which is coming down to brighten up darkness. It's not a pure light, it's light which itself is called darkness. It's not the essential light. It's a little siphoning of light, which is given over to brighten up the world. And he's talking about even the Torah is that. Even the Torah is that. Torah is the Shema. As it says, Novlos Chochma Shalamayim LaTorah. This pasuk, it says that Novlos is like things like foliage that falls off the tree. Novlos Chochma. So the foliage that falls off of Chochma, Shalamayla, of the real, that's what Torah is. Torah is it comes from there, but it's like the foliage, like the dead leaves, so to speak. And for us, it's enough to transform this world to pure godliness. But it doesn't come from it comes from it. It's not an expression of the pure ayin. Maybe that's called Torah's Mashiach. The Penimius of Torah is. But Nigla of Torah is not. And it goes very well, because why? Nigla of Torah, what is Nigla of Torah? Nigla of Torah is the normal conversations of Torah which talk about the simple performance of the mitzvahs. How do you do proper agriculture? How do you keep the Sabbath? How do you put on tefillin? How do you have proper business dealings? All this is, Torah also instructs us simply on how to live a healthy human life. But the very fact that it's talking to us as humans in our dimension means that it's clearly the light which is going to lighten up the darkness. It's not pure light, because pure light doesn't speak to us in our language and tell us what to do. It doesn't even consider us. There is no us. So the Torah on the level of Nigla, and the revealed parts of Torah, they are subjugated to worldly dimension. But Penimius Torah, what does Penimius Torah speak about? It doesn't speak about the world. It speaks about how there is no world. And that's because it represents mamash, the true ayin. So if a Yaakov is going to have a Shmini Atzeres, he's only going to have it by learning Chassidus, basically. It's only there to light the darkness, and it's not the essential light, because that is specifically the etzem, the Or HaAtzmi, that does that. All right, we'll hold here.
Where is the source of the Gentile soul? Where is that located?
It's located from the external part of Kesser. Esav
In the lowest world?
No, it's not. It's very, very high.
Okay.